What is self-discipline? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What is self-discipline? Self-discipline is the ability to control, manage, motivate, and regulate one's self. Total self. And it is the prerequisite for self-mastery. So self-discipline, as most of us are familiar with, begins with fundamental biological control of oneself. The ability to move our limbs, the ability to control our appetite, how much we eat, how much we drink, what we consume, where we take our body, how we can make our body better or worse, what we control, what we put into our mind. Any physical, biological behavior is controlled by ourselves through self-discipline. And in there, we begin to be able to explore the knowledge of self. We find out what we're good at, we find out what we're not good at, we find our limits, all these things. For instance, you find out how coordinated you are, how intelligent you are, what types of body size you can have. You find out that you can regulate the size and shape of your body through your own personal routines and habits, food and exercise, and anything else that falls under those. And you find out what the limits that you have are, which means when you find out the limits of what you can do, then that is also the process of finding your ability and your ability level. So in that sense, with self-discipline allows you to explore your gifts. And it begins with simple things. It begins with really simple ability to control your routines from a very early age. And the earlier that you can build a relationship internally with yourself in regards to regulating yourself with self-discipline, then you can start to explore much grander things. Now, when you physically and biologically get a basic level of self-discipline, where you have the self-discipline to take care of the basics, like personal hygiene, right? Like you remember to floss every day, which is arguably the most important hygiene routine that exists, because your gums, your teeth are the only place where you have exposed bone in your body, and your gums and the way your nerves and bloodstream are set up at your gum level, it's one of the most open areas to infection that can go directly into your bloodstream and your brain. So flossing might arguably be the most important hygienic routine that we have for a bunch of reasons. So in terms of self-discipline, let's say you start with your hygiene and you say, okay, I floss a bunch every day, and everything builds out from there. You have all these hygiene routines, and let's say, okay, by the age of 7, you've got your hygiene routines down pat. Well, you can look throughout life and see people that are 80 who never got that down. And when you realize how important it is to make sure that the one area that is most accessible to the bloodstream that goes to your brain and your brain's nerve endings and has access to your nervous system and all this stuff in terms of your gums, you can see direct correlations between those people who are at 80 and didn't keep good hygiene in terms of their gums and their bloodstream versus those who did. And that's a habit and routine and a product of self-discipline that one can learn before the age of 7. So when we look at self-discipline just in terms of setting up personal hygiene routines at an early age, we can see how extremely important it is. It has nearly an amplification effect to learning young. Now, everything in the realm of self-discipline at that age of physiology and biology and all that have some degree of effect that matters. We know that. Significant. So when we get to a point where we say, okay, let's say you have most of that on lockdown, you got most of that personal hygiene down, and you start getting, and that includes exercise and fitness shape and all these different things. And then you start to get into the more inner self-discipline aspects of self-discipline of the human condition, which start to include emotional discipline. And it's not something that gets discussed a lot, but self-discipline in regards of emotion is essential for growth as a human being, in terms of your maturity, in terms of incorporating new perspectives, in terms of incorporating the ability to interact with other human beings in high energy situations. Emotional self-discipline really is laid on the bedrock of physical and biological self-discipline. So that when we can go through life, which is ostensibly just a materialized consciousness of the universe, and we start engaging with it and it starts absorbing into us our emotions, which I did do a video on what are emotions, you can check that out. Emotions, which are our energy in motion, start to be absorbed through our physical vehicle and through the layers of our system. They come in through our skin, they come in through our electromagnetic field, they come in through all these systems, and then they go through, they go through our chakral systems, and then they go through our nervous system, and then all these electrical impulses get fed into our brain in our emotions. And then the brain dispenses or doesn't dispense, it manages all of the internal chemicals and things like endorphins and serotonin, dopamine, all the other things, and all of the homeostasis that occurs within the body, to include the regulation of blood pressure and pulse, the whole thing, the body system as a whole is reacting to the level of emotional input that is filtered through the sense of our emotional discipline, which is self-discipline. Now the Stoics get really deep into this. The Stoics I have to demonstrate some emotional discipline there. So the Stoics are famous for being a school of philosophy that really focuses on the emotional discipline aspect of navigating the consciousness that is life, right? They teach detachment, much in the same way the Buddhists teach it, and really detachment of like the emotions, making it intellectual while you're going through the emotions of life, and then be able to process it in a meditative period. Now, having self-discipline in terms of emotions really accelerates things, because you can fully feel emotions in the moment, and you can process them and be in them and enjoy them regardless of the nature of them. They could be terrifying or they could be joyous, but you get to a point of understanding through emotional self-discipline that emotions are kind of the chief feature of experiencing life in the body. And so they're accepted more freely, and you get more out of it, and more information gets transferred in. And then when you do go into these meditative or reflective periods to unpack all of the different information that reside within the emotional experiences, you're in a better position to do so. And then that acknowledgement, which I do have another video on what is acknowledgement, is the emotional processing, leads to the emotional processing. So acknowledgement and then emotional processing are the engines for spiritual growth. And you can translate that as maturity or higher perspective or ascension or illumination or enlightenment. They all sort of get into those areas. Now, those higher areas don't get unlocked until you know thyself. And knowing thyself is a combination of having, to some degree, mastered the physical self-discipline, and then building on top of it emotional self-discipline. Because then when you have those two as a solid foundation of self-discipline, you had to explore most of yourself, and now you're in a position to know thyself enough that you can start getting into the more etheric realms and you can start to explore consciousness and leaving your body and all of these more spiritual aspects of the human experience, which, you know, they're beyond philosophy. They're you have to experience them to kind of know them. And any sort of description or articulation of the spiritual realm is really, for people that aren't into that realm yet, all you can really do is circumscribe what it is. It's the classic leading a horse to water, and the water being the spiritual realm. You can't make them drink, but once that horse starts drinking, you know, then they're in. But the physical, I should rather say, and the physical self-discipline and the emotional self-discipline allow safer navigation and openings up of the spiritual and perspective realm. And when one comes back from those realms to process that energy through the body, then that's really where the emotional and the physical discipline comes in, because it's a lot of energy and it does change a person to come back with those perspectives and energies. And you need the discipline to center the body so that erratic or volatile behavior does not exhibit itself. Now, you get a really high vision or something, and then you come back and lose your mind, and you can't believe that now that you've seen the ideal state, the physical state that you're in is like unacceptable, and you label it all sorts of things, and you just lash out because you can't handle yourself because you don't have self-discipline. It's like if you send an astronaut into space who wasn't well trained, right? Let's say they didn't have psychological discipline, right? And they go up into space and they lose their mind. Like I had a West Point classmate, Frank Rubio. He went to the International Space Station, and it wasn't planned, but basically he got stuck up there, and he ended up doing the longest American astronaut stay in space. It was like over 300 days. And so if he didn't have psychological discipline and he'd gone up there, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, by the way, you're going to be staying up there for, it might have even been a year, but close to a year, unplanned. I mean, if he didn't have psychological self-discipline, we could have gotten stories back on Earth like astronaut loses his mind, astronaut, you know, does all kinds of erratic things in space, you know, horrible things, if he'd lost his mind. But he had self-mastery. So he was able to handle that experience, and he's able to handle the fluctuations and the changes in the experience that he couldn't have known when he went up for it. Now, he was prepared for the potentiality of it, which is another thing that self-discipline allows for. It allows you to handle the changes in life. And as we know, life has demonstrated itself to be nothing but change as the main constant. So what is self-discipline? It's the ability to manage, motivate, control, and regulate your behavior physically, internally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, the whole person, the whole self. And there's innumerable paths to achieve it. And it is the prerequisite for knowing thyself. And in fact, it sort of encompasses the journey. That is the beginning of the journey of knowing thyself, is to engage in forms of self-discipline. And they can be whatever. And then when that sort of self-discipline has resulted in some level of self-mastery, then the universe can really open up to the practitioner of self-discipline. So I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner with me. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and have fun.